Brett is a consultant, writer, and speaker living here in Atlanta in Cabbagetown. He's previously vice president of client experience for Boosterthon Fun Run, an innovative school fundraising company based out of here in Atlanta. Between 2005 and 2016, Brett was a key player in helping them raise more than $150 million for schools. Within Booster, he led a team of creatives and developed high-end character and leadership content for more than 1.3 million students annually. In late 2016, Brett launched Blue Babies Pink, a 44-episode journey through faith, sexuality, loneliness, singleness, and emotional health. To date, Blue Babies Pink has drawn more than 50,000 readers from around the world and spawned a 2,200-mile, 5-city bookless tour in early 2017. He's passionate about storytelling, leadership, good design, antiques, Seth Godin, SEC football, Chick-fil-A, Taylor Swift, Tarantino movies, C.S. Lewis. He serves on the board of directors for Beloved Atlanta and Alpha Tau Omega Fraternity. Let's give a big round of applause for my friend, Brett Trapp.
So this is the photo of a broken taboo. The lady at the center is runner Catherine Switzer. This is at the 1967 Boston Marathon. On that day, there were about 800 participants in the marathon. All of them were male, except for Catherine. The not-so-gentleman attacking her, his name is Jock. Jock Simple. He was the race director. Catherine was the first woman to officially run in the Boston Marathon. At the time, women were not allowed to run long distances. In the Olympics, they were forbidden. At the time, it was thought that frail women could not endure such grueling distances. Some people even theorized that perhaps their uteruses would fall out if they ran too far. So Jock, the race director, he did not realize there was a woman that had entered in the race. She actually used her first two initials so no one caught the fact that she was running. When Jock Simple found out, in a fit of rage, he basically attacked Catherine, took matters into his own hands. Today we're talking about taboo, and I really cannot imagine one photo better capturing the essence of taboo than the one that you're looking at. I mean, look at this photo. We have the first woman running in an officially sanctioned marathon in 2,500 years. I mean, the marathon was in 490 BC when it was started, and the taboo was strong. You know, long distance is for men. It's grueling, it's too hard. Your uterus might fall out like the engine of a go-kart when you least expect it. And finally, a woman works up the courage to break this taboo, and what happens? An angry old white guy comes and attacks her, named Jock of all things. And to make matters worse, in this photo, you see everyone is looking at her 360 degrees. People are staring, gawking, and perhaps even thinking that's what she gets for breaking this taboo. This is why taboos exist, because everyone is scared to question them until someone like Catherine Switzer comes along. Taboos are these unwritten rules that sort of hover above us. They govern what we do. Most of us don't know where they came from or who put them there. They exert incredible control over our daily lives. But for today's purposes, I'm going to define a taboo like this. It's an enshrined idea that is so sacred, profane, or mysterious that it is unapproachable. The reality is we live our lives under a pantheon of taboos. Enshrined is the right word here because it sort of connotes an essence of religiosity, which is often how taboos feel. They are unapproachable because we dare not go near them, nor can we even talk about them. Oftentimes, A taboo is something we just can't talk about. It is what it is, and it always will be. But we are going to talk about taboos today. My name is Brett. I'm a resident of Atlanta. I originally grew up in Alabama. I was the son of a preacher, my dad and my mom a teacher. For about a decade, I was a creative director at a fundraising company here in Atlanta, but last year went out on my own as an independent sort of creative consultant. My life's been a lot of transition lately. Part of that transition has been acquiring a home in Atlanta's most magical neighborhood, Cabbagetown. So I bought a loft in an old cotton mill, and when you have 17-foot ceilings, you can get really creative and kind of go vertical. So I had a guy install some shelving. This is not a great picture, but 6 shelves kind of going up this brick wall. Basically, I wanted it to kind of serve as a gallery for my antiques. So then I bought this old antique barn ladder on the right, which is climbable, not advised, but it is, you can climb it. And as the curator of these shelves, I got to decide what went on the shelves. They're very inaccessible. I put that stuff on the top rows, months ago. I have not touched it since. I learned early on, those kind of ladders are scary as hell. About halfway up, it gets really scary. But I love collecting early 20th century antiques, and this is my gallery. This is my shrine to that little part of America's history. And this photo is really a metaphor for how I want us to think about taboos today. Because before any of us were born, the cultural tastemakers, gurus of the world had been going up and down this ladder, placing taboos on these shelves, placing them just out of touch, barely out of sight, so that nobody would question them and they would be enshrined as unquestionable truth. These taboos, they loom over us, sort of casting a shadow. We were born looking up at shelves jam-packed with all kinds of taboos that nobody wants to talk about. And that ladder is there because, but most of us dare not go near it, right? We dare not have the courage to climb that ladder and mess with that gallery of taboos, lest a jock simple descend upon us, or our grandmother, or our dad, or the community we grew up in, lest they descend upon us in a fit of rage to execute their justice. So what kind of taboos inhabit this gallery? One more time, taboo is an enshrined idea that is so sacred, profane, or mysterious that it is unapproachable. The first type of taboos are sacred taboos. These are taboos we hold in extremely high regard, to the point where no one would question them. A couple of examples, Hindu veneration for cows. This is often cited by anthropologists as an example of a sacred taboo. Another example, in 1996, the Taliban in Afghanistan declared that forecasting the weather was a form of sorcery. So what did they do? They stormed the main meteorological office and basically destroyed it because their interpretation of their sacred text forbids any form of prediction or divination. The second category of taboos are those that are profane. And many of them, listen, are deservedly so. Incest, murder, cannibalism, infanticide, and more. These are often the dark images that your mind conjures when you hear the word taboo. And this is a great time to illuminate the fact that not all taboos are bad, right? I love the fact that we live in a society where we're not questioning eating each other. We're not debating the merits of cannibalism and things like that. Totally fine with those taboos, so they're not all bad. Of course, there are smaller taboos that can feel quite profane, but aren't necessarily that bad. For example, go ask your boss or a close friend, ask them how much money they make, right? In that moment, you will feel the profane nature of a taboo, right? Like, very awkward. In Turkey, it's taboo to blow your nose during a meal. That's considered profane. At some point, somebody in Turkey scaled that ladder and up on one of those shelves put this unquestionable thing that says, we don't blow our noses around here. Or just think about your parents having sex. That was like an audible, ew, right? That's a profane thought. It's terrible, and that's a little reminder that not everything that feels profane necessarily is, so leave your parents alone. Let mom and dad do their thing. The final category of taboos are those that are mysterious. These are often ideas that are new, they're unproven. Our society hasn't quite figured them out yet. And of course, we know that humans are innately fearful of things we don't understand or can't put in a category. So we'll create a narrative or some kind of moral system around them. A couple of examples: in certain parts of Nigeria, some believe that if a pregnant mother eats snail meat while pregnant, her child will be slow. In a rural part of Madagascar, some believe that twins are a curse due to black magic. This results in twins being abandoned. One journalist in the UK dubbed them bad luck babies. And when she asked one of the tribal leaders about this policy, his quote to her was, "Keeping twins is like eating your own shit." So this makes me wonder, like in Madagascar, who had the right to climb that ladder and make this declaration that twins are a curse? And of course, in our own country, we've got plenty of mystery-based taboos, so we can't get too judgy of others. A little small example is online dating. If you want to entertain yourself, go back and read articles from like the late 90s on online dating. It's very mysterious and dark and all these horror stories of things that have happened and, bullet points: beware the dangers of online dating, right? And the reality is, as we're sitting in this room today, a decade or so later, half of the room has already been swiping on some dating app, most likely. So this is an example of a taboo that has sort of dissipated over time. Our culture is sort of adjusted, and it's not quite as mysterious and frightening as it used to be. So this brings us to a great question. What do you do when you look up at those shelves, that gallery of cultural taboos, and you see a little part of yourself on one of those shelves? What do you do when some part of you feels like a taboo, or you've been told that some part of that is a taboo? Something about you is profane or weird or can't be talked about. I call this an internal taboo, and I've made a little edit here. An enshrined belief about yourself that is so sacred, profane, or mysterious that it is unapproachable. And I know all about an internal taboo. Growing up, I was the son of a Southern Baptist pastor in a small town called Florence, Alabama. Born into a very loving family, had a great experience going to the church that we went to. Went to a small Christian high school, played basketball and football, was serious about my faith, was very involved in our church's youth activities. But I had a secret, a big, bad, taboo secret that I could not tell anybody about. I was same-sex attracted, otherwise known as gay. I could not say the word gay back then because it was such a shameful and fearful word. That word had been imbued with so much taboo energy in my life that I couldn't even admit it or acknowledge it. And so in that space where Southern culture intersects with Christian culture, homosexuality exists as sort of a top shelf taboo, if I'm being honest. And if you think about it, it sort of inhabits all three categories of the taboo, right? It violates the sacred piece because, as most of us know who grew up in the Christian tradition, our holy texts, our sacred texts, only venerate and honor heterosexual relationships. We're told it's profane because it's against nature and it defies traditional marriage. And it's mysterious because it's rare. Typically only about 3 to 5% of the human population identifies as LGBT, so it's often likely that you could live your whole life and never know a gay person. There just aren't enough of us to go around. So it's always kind of mysterious. We never quite know what it's going to be like. So sitting here in the shadow of this massive taboo in my mind, I was scared to death. And I did what most other gay kids did back in the 90s in the South. We ignored it and we hid and we went on dates with girls and tried to make it work. And I didn't say a word. I was completely petrified of people finding out. There was nothing safe about this topic. In fact, there was no one in my life that I felt was safe enough to talk about this with. Or maybe that was just a result of my own fear. And so around the time I turned 30, I knew it was time to make some changes in my life. I had done high school, college, my 20s, doing the career thing, hiding from this taboo, got some counseling, and really that was the only way that I engaged with this part of my life. I buried myself in work, essentially trying so hard to run as fast as I could from this really ugly thing. But around the time I turned 30, it was time to make some changes in my life. I knew it was time to get on that ladder and make a few steps, one after another. It was time to climb that ladder and see for myself what was that thing on that top shelf that I was so scared of. And the thing about climbing ladders is that it's scary as hell. They wobble a lot. You're all alone. You second guess yourself. You might even question whether or not that ladder should be climbed. But for me, it was about me. It was for my own emotional health to climb that ladder and look at that thing that I'd been so fearful of. So in my 30s, I got on the ladder and I got a little bit more comfortable with ladder life. I began to approach the unapproachable. And then I took the step of opening up to some close friends and beginning to have that conversation and finally being able to talk about this thing that I had been so scared to talk about. All of my friends, specifically my Christian friends, were incredibly kind, incredibly gracious, and incredibly sweet. It wasn't so bad on that ladder. And as a matter of fact, I learned that the story I feared most wasn't that bad. But then I got to the top of the ladder and I realized what I had to do next. So I did what every good millennial does in times of uncertainty. I started a blog. I called the blog Blue Babies Pink. The name was inspired by a story I'd read online about a decade earlier. And my first post was called A Gossip Guide to Brett Trapp's Sexuality. And this was sort of my cheeky way of coming out, and I pulled in all these crazy gay cliches and just kind of wanted to get a little laugh out of it because I knew it was going to be a little bit intense for those who knew me from back in the day. Kind of just wanted to burn down the gossip mill because when you're 35 and 34 at the time and haven't really dated, sometimes people gossip. And then the next day, I told everyone, I said, hey, for the next 44 days, I'm going to write about this story. I'm going to invite you into this journey I've been on, and you don't have to read, and I don't really care, what you believe about this topic at the end of it, but if you would like to follow along, you can come check it out. So I wanted to tell my story as authentically as possible, as honestly as possible, but I also wanted to bring some beauty to something that had felt so bad. So I hired a photographer, a guy named Sterling Graves here in Atlanta, who's unbelievable, who helped me tell the story with some of the beautiful images that you see right now. Every daily installment of the 44 days had its own image set. And having this sort of dual citizenship as a person of faith, also as a person of the LGBT community, I knew that would bring a little tension. And it might bring some angst to people who are reading potentially in one or both of those camps. So I told them, here's my quote I wrote in that prologue. If you're Christian, this won't be Christian enough for you. And if you're gay, it won't be gay enough for you. But stick with it if you can, because I want you here, even if we are very, very different. Essentially, I was telling the reader, come get on this ladder with me. Let's climb to the top and let me show you around on that top shelf, at least as I see it from my perspective. So every day I woke up and I wrote. It was not pre-written. I wrote every day, and I tried my best to write with kindness and grace to make the unapproachable approachable. I wrote about loneliness, shame, celibacy, singleness, deep into your 20s, my struggle with God and this whole thing, and a few really bad bouts with anxiety as well. Thousands of people began to follow along and read the daily posts, and some of them began emailing me. I got incredible emails from people in the LGBT community, got amazing emails from parents of gay children, and then tons of people who emailed saying, Brett, I don't know where you're going with this, but I want you to know that I'm listening. It was all super healing for me to invite people into that story. After a few weeks, the story wrapped up. During that time frame, about 50,000 people had come through and checked out Blue Babies Pink. And then after that, I decided to record an audio version of the story because not everybody loves to read long blog posts. So very low production. It was literally me sitting in my closet with a $60 Amazon microphone. Closet was obviously the most appropriate place to to tell the story. Where else would I do it, right? It took a few weeks to record it, then I just released it as a free podcast in all the podcast apps. And so then this blogger came along, and she posted about it, and that day, 18,000 people came to the site, brand new readers who came into the story. They started listening to the audio version, and then as that day wore on, this first day that all these people came, we were watching. Of course, you're going to watch your little ranking on the iTunes thing because that's interesting. And so the category I was in was religion and spirituality. And so about midway through that day, I think I popped in at number 60 and then 57, 37. And then the commute time hit. People were commuting, listening to podcasts, and it jumped to number 4. I got super stressed out, so I went for a run on the Beltline. And I went for my little run. And as I was winding down, I was like, let me look at it again. And I looked at it. It was number 1. My face was on the top of that chart. And in that moment, the story that I feared the most and had been running from for so long was on the top of a chart in freaking iTunes. And if I was sitting where you're sitting, I would feel like that feels very braggy, and that's not really my intent, because in that moment, there was no ego. It was this weird kind of moment of healing to see that piece. To date, people have listened to 302,000 episodes of Blue Baby's Pink. That's 3.6 million minutes of human time invested in listening to my little Taboo story. The reality is everything changed for me when I allowed myself to climb that ladder. And yeah, you could say that me climbing that ladder was me acquiescing to a cultural taboo, but for me it was mostly just personal. Me reclaiming that part of myself that had been so utterly scary and unapproachable. In fact, I told readers, to me it's more important that the story is told than it's heard. The freedom is simply in the speaking of it. But what I discovered in this process is that after you climb one ladder, you get better at it, and it gets a little bit easier. I'm not talking about big bad cultural taboos. I'm talking about those internal ones that I mentioned earlier. I discovered that on the shelves of my soul, there were all sorts of unapproachable things hiding under the dust. They were things that I would not allow myself to talk about, things that were just kind of easier to ignore, to be honest. And so in the last few years, I have kind of just lived on the ladder. I've gotten comfortable on the ladder. And I'm not talking about questioning every basic tenet of truth and thing that I grew up with and throwing it in the trash. I'm just talking about inspecting the little things in your life that, again, you've just been scared to talk about and to acknowledge. I gave myself permission to approach them. I climbed the ladder of that moment in 7th grade when that teacher embarrassed me and made me cry in front of all those other kids. Climbed the ladder of that locker room moment in 8th grade when that kid called me bird chest. I climbed the ladder of achievement and asked myself why I needed achievement to feel worthy of others' love. I climbed the ladder of always having to be right, learning to let go. I climbed the ladder of my own introversion and made peace with the fact that not everyone's called to be a networker. It's okay. I climbed the ladder of my forehead. I made peace with the fact that my forehead is huge, that you can land a plane on it, that a guy in Cabbagetown once told me I looked like, quote, Ryan Reynolds with a big forehead. It's okay now. I think my forehead is quite lovely. I think when God whipped out the blueprint and designed my forehead, it was okay. And I need to be okay with that. I even climbed some silly little ladders, like, why am I embarrassed to wear a bicycle helmet on the Beltline? Why do I keep buying craft cocktails when they make me poor and fat? Why is my closet packed to overflowing, yet I hate all of my clothes? I climbed the ladder of why I used to get offended by stupid little things at work. A therapist helped me climb that one, teaching me that being offended is a choice. Sometimes we need experts to help us climb ladders. I climbed the ladder of why I was so jealous of my coworker, Steven. He's done nothing wrong, Brett. Let it go. Your feelings are false, I told myself. I discovered that when we let ourselves approach the unapproachable, we can learn new ways to think about them. I climbed the ladder of that thing inside of me that is obsessed with wanting everyone around me to be happy. A coworker told me, Brett, you're not responsible for the emotions of others. Sometimes friends take your hand and put it on a new ladder. And I even climbed the ladder of love and dealt with that voice inside of me that said, no one really knows you, Brett, and if they did, they would not love you. I dealt with that voice. I think one of the great lies of our generation is that it's everyone else's fault. Call me old-fashioned, but I still believe that it starts with me. If you were to open my computer, you would find lists, actual lists of weaknesses, insecurities, and fears, a shrine not to my greatness, but to the glorious struggle of being human. I learned that if we don't write down some of these things, we don't even know what's on those shelves, but we have to have the courage to write them down. And as I climb these ladders, I've gotten a little bit healthier, and as it turns out, emotional health is way more valuable then a job promotion, increased income, new clients, and a growing Instagram following. For it is my character that is the prime asset. And my character has a profound impact on my career. Consider this. Between the ages of 22 and 30, you will work 19% of your career. That means 81% of your career doesn't even begin until your 30th birthday. What if we began to view those early years as the foundation for everything else? What if we invested that time in climbing our own ladders and finally letting ourselves approach the stuff we don't want to talk about and making peace with who we are and learning to stop hating ourselves? I hope every millennial in this room wants to champion some noble cause and tear down some ignoble ones. But I just hope each of us remembers that the best way to do that is to be healthy and whole. And I hope that we remember that the path to being healthy and whole often begins with a ladder. Thank you guys very much.
All right, thanks, Brett. That was awesome. Thank you so much. All right, we're going to do a couple questions. We're a little over time, but we're going to do some question because the traffic delayed us a little bit this morning. So we're going to do 2 or 3 questions. Molly's got a microphone. She'll run over there. I'll run this one over here. So just raise your hands if you have any questions for Brett. All right, how about over here?
Hi, Brett. Thank you. That was a great talk. Really enjoyed it. Can you help me understand where you got the name Blue Babies Pink from?
I can. Yeah, so I read an article in 2008 from the Memphis Commercial Appeal, and it was about a doctor named Sheldon Caronis, who was a probably 80-year-old-ish neonatal doctor in Memphis. Memphis has the highest infant mortality rate. Infant mortality is defined as any child that dies before their first birthday. Memphis's infant mortality rate is almost on par with some countries in the developing world. And so this article basically interviewed Sheldon Caronis, Dr. Caronis, and the interviewer asked him something like, what do you hope to be known for? And he dedicated his life to kind of attacking this problem. And his response was turning blue babies pink. And in 2008, I was in a rough spot. I felt very blue, felt kind of dead, very, very sad. And but my eyes locked on to that phrase. And the English major degree in me was like double entendre. I love this. It's like gender and going from death to life. And so I bought the URL in 2008, paid my $12.99 a year to GoDaddy ever since. And so hang on to them. You never know when you might use them. But yeah, I really had a sense of one day wanting to tell the story. And at that moment, I knew that was going to be the name of it. That was 9 years ago. So, yeah.
Other questions? Okay, in the back. Our fearless parking leader.
So I guess it is a cop-out that this isn't really a question. I just wanted to commend you on kind of the courageous steps that you've taken. I mean, I've watched 1 or 2 of my friends go through a similar process, and yeah, it's really hard. But anyways, again, this is not a question, but I just wanted to commend you on your
hey, comments. Cool.
Yeah, this is awesome.
Thanks.
Any more affirmations or questions?
Thank you for coming and talking. I've been through a lot of similar things. I came out in my 20s. I'm just wondering how you deal with some of those fears, like you were talking about putting a helmet on the belt line, how you do that kind of day-to-day outside of the blog, how you kind of overcome some of those anxieties and climb the ladder for the small stuff.
Yeah, so I think learning new ways to think about things that are really scary is probably the first step. I had a therapist step me through this thing called the 4 R's, which is sort of a therapist treatment for certain types of OCD. And I certainly won't try to explain that because I'm not qualified to, but I would recommend a book called You Are Not Your Brain. And for me, learning about how my brain works and how the way we think about things determine things, and kind of going through that little 4R process in those moments of an unexperienced or unwanted desire, it's kind of how they worded it, was super helpful and healing for me. And just learning to let go of that stuff. But, I think, it's been said before, courage is kind of like a muscle. So I consider the gay thing and that journey I've been on to be a huge blessing. I'm super thankful for it because it kind of has allowed me to not feel like I have to sort of fit in and acquiesce with all the expectations of culture per se. And it's just made me okay with addressing some of those other things, taboo type things that are in my mind and heart that I'm super scared of. So literally, I mentioned in the talk, I have lists. I have a list of my weaknesses. I know a lot of leadership folks will talk about don't give your weaknesses power, focus on your strengths. I do believe that. But for me, it was super healing to make a catalog of the things, either weaknesses professionally or things that I was scared of, little hitches that were kind of like obstacles that were interfering with my relationships. And just making that list and begin to kind of just think through them and call them what they were, for me, was a big part of that healing journey, and it's made me a much, much better person. And there's still lots more, ladders to climb, more lists of things to make. So we're all a work in progress, so still working on it.
Any questions over there on Molly's side?
Yeah, maybe this is a question more for Creative Mornings organization. But first, thank you, because I have one son who's been through your journey and has climbed some ladders, and I have another son whose journey is not yours. It's not a sexuality issue, but he's stuck at the bottom of the ladder. And so my question for Creative Mornings is, how soon will this talk be available for us to share with all the people who weren't here with us today?
Real soon. Typically in a couple weeks.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, let's give Brett a huge round of applause.